Fire Emblem can be a tricky game for new players to learn the intricacies of. While the core concepts of the series, like the weapon triangle, are easy to explain and grasp, more complex concepts like why warp is so powerful or how valuable flyer utility is can be trickier to explain. Good Fire Emblem games use the early game to teach players some of these concepts, and the best ones can teach a lot of them by building teachable moments into early game maps, rather than by including lengthy text-based tutorials. Fire Emblem Engage isn't text tutorial free, but it does an awesome job of including teachable moments that illustrate important Fire Emblem concepts, especially in the early game. The first couple chapters of Engage explain all the basics of the game to you, like most Fire Emblem games do. You'll learn how terrain works, the difference between defense and resistance, as well as how to engage with emblem rings. Where Engage sets itself apart from some of the rest of the series is towards the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 2's boss is Lumera, and she has an emblem ring of her own, Sigurd. When you approach her towards the end of the map, she'll activate the ring and charge you from much further than her threat range indicated, then canter away to the safest space available. This immediately teaches you a few things that are going to be important in Engage. First, bosses move in this game. This is true for most of the maps in the game, and it's good that they let you learn it here, where if you lose the map, it's only a few minutes to get back to where you were. Second, this boss shows you exactly how to use Sigurd shortly before you get your hands on the ring for yourself. Players can see the value of Sigurd's move bonus and canter right away because it's used against them. Assuming you're leading with your tankiest unit, Vander, this attack will also teach you about weapon effectiveness since Lumera will hit him with a Rider's Bane. Importantly though, even on Maddening, Lumera does not one-shot Vander, so you learn your lesson, but you aren't punished too hard for your mistake, which I think is a great thing for one of the earliest maps in the game. Next up we have Chapter 3, which introduces two important concepts when your new units join on turn 2. This is where we get our first archer, Edie, and she spawns right next to a pair of flyers that she can one-shot. There are several more flyers on the map, and Etie's contributions teach you just how well bows perform against flyers and help her to make a good first impression, even if she probably isn't worth investing in long term. The concept of bows versus flyers will be important for players to learn now, since you get your own flyer on the next map. The next concept in Chapter 3 is chain attacks. Boucheron is our first backup unit, and he comes in good position to make an attack and contribute via chip damage via chain attacks. This is one of the few concepts that I think could have been introduced a little better. I would have given Boucheron a hand axe. He gets one in the next chapter anyway, and I don't think having one would break this map very much. But it would help show how much better 1-2 range makes backup units, and make it more likely that the player sees multiple chain attacks over the course of the map, and internalizes how useful they can be. The last concept that's briefly introduced in this map is armored enemies, as the boss will take little damage from most of your physical units, so players will at least learn that magic typically performs well against armored enemies, and they learn that chain attacks work well against them too. Finally, we get to Chapter 4, which I think is one of the best teaching maps in the series. It introduces multiple new concepts in a really organic way, and all of the learnings in this map are fueled by your new recruits, which include a knight, a flyer, and a mage that comes with the Celica emblem ring. Louis and Chloe, your new armor and Pegasus knights, start the map far away from the rest of your army, in a setup designed to show what each class is useful for. Several physical enemies approach from the north, but there's a fort and forest slowing their path. This is a perfect opportunity for Louis to show what he's good for. You can sit him down on the fort, and he can withstand the oncoming enemies for several turns. To the right of where Louis starts, there are multiple magic users. This is Chloe's time to shine. She has good resistance compared to Louis, and she has enough speed to double the mages. Players paying attention will notice that against most enemies, Chloe's doubling makes her deal more damage than Louis despite her lower strength. She also comes with a javelin, which lets her fight the mages on enemy phase. So just from this little area, a new player learns that Louis is great against physical attackers but struggles with mages, and also learn a little bit about flyer utility, terrain bonuses, the value of 1-2 range, and the importance of speed when it comes to a unit's offense. The really interesting thing this map teaches, I think better than any other Fire Emblem map, is the value of warp. On Maddening, even when using Louis and Chloe wisely, it is possible for them to become overwhelmed by the amount of enemies they have to face before the rest of your army can reach them. Fortunately, your new mage, Celine, comes with a new emblem ring that provides Warp Ragnarok. This can be used to teleport her from her starting point to Chloe and Louis at any time. Once Saline joins up with your new allies, there are several low resistance enemies around for her to help deal with. This helps her make a great first impression on the player. Most Fire Emblem games introduce warp much later in the game and rarely give you such an obvious use case to show players how to use the ability to their advantage. What's more is that by putting warp on an emblem ring, there are lots of opportunities for players to experiment with it in a safe environment where they don't have to worry about running out of uses on a staff. By the time players get a warp staff with limited uses, they'll have grown accustomed to it and have a decent idea of how to use the ability. So that's a lot of learnings from just this small pocket of the map, but the rest of the map is interesting to play too. Enemies attack the rest of your army from two directions, and the concepts of villages and reinforcements are introduced. There's also a sense of urgency here, as you want to get your army over to where they can support Chloe and Louis as fast as you can. A new player has a ton to learn from this map, and learnings from previous maps are reinforced here. In Chapter 3, we learned that flyers are weak to bows and magic does well against armor units. This knowledge allows players to make wise decisions about where to place Chloe and Louis. They know Chloe needs to kill the mages before they get to Louis, and they know that Louis needs to take care of the archer before the archer gets to Chloe. Most of the takeaways people have from this map will come from played experience rather than just by reading a text-based tutorial, which makes it stick better and also makes it a little more fun to learn. Chapter 5 is the first map that I would say is a bit of a miss in terms of teaching players new things. The map is loaded with physical units, so it's another great opportunity for Louis to shine, but we already learned how to use him in the previous chapter. So there are only a few new concepts taught on this map, and I think some of them aren't that important, and one of them is taught a little poorly. The first concept we see in Chapter 5 is treasure chests. We learn how to open them, and that enemies will go get the treasure if we take too long. This is an important concept as it's used in many places in the game, but I also think it's a fairly basic one that doesn't need a whole map dedicated to it. Chests can be a minor learning on a map that teaches something else. The only other obvious teachable moments on this map are the one-tile hallway on the left side and the breakable wall near the boss. The one-tile hallway does do a good job of teaching you the power of one-tile choke points, but the problem is that this game barely has any one-tile choke points outside of this map. One-tile chokes are just very uncommon in this game, and for good reason. They tend to make for boring gameplay. So you do learn something here, but something that won't be applicable for the vast majority of the game. The useful thing that this one-tile choke can teach you is how to use Sigurd's Engage ability. This is one of the first times you'll have a great opportunity to hit multiple people with it, and since it's a one-tile choke point, the unit using the ability won't be overwhelmed afterwards, since the enemies won't all be able to attack him because they'll be stuck in the one-tile hallway. The last thing that this map teaches you is breakable terrain. However, I think on harder difficulties, it's taught in a way that is a bit of a trap. The game mentions this breakable wall to the left of the boss. However, I really think breaking this wall makes the map more difficult than just looping back to the beginning and breaking the main door to the room. Breaking the wall on the left and moving in aggroes lots of enemies at once at a time where you don't have great combat units to deal with them. On the other hand, breaking the door at the bottom lets you take on enemies at a slower pace. I suppose this teaches you that you shouldn't just break every wall that you see, but it also sort of teaches you not to trust the game, which isn't ideal. Chapter 6 is the last map that I would say is designed primarily to teach you core concepts. Things start to open up after this, divine paralogs become available, and you start to have a lot of options when it comes to deployment, promotions, and rings. So it's a little harder for designers to generate situations that require you to use specific techniques to beat them. Prior to this point, the designers had a much better idea of exactly what tools the player had available to them, especially when someone's playing on fixed growths mode. The main things that Chapter 6 teaches us about are Fog of War, covert units, and daggers. This is the first Fog of War chapter of the game, so ideas like vision and the value of torches are immediately introduced, as is the concept of standing torches around the map that can be lit if a unit interacts with them. The more interesting concepts, though, are the ones introduced by our new thief, Yunaka. Yunaka brings with her a new weapon type in the form of daggers, which can poison enemies, causing them to take more damage. Since Yunaka and Alir start the map separate from the rest of your army, you'll have to use both of them in order to take out enemies in a timely manner. So you're sure to see how poison is applied and how it works here. Additionally, this map has a lot of forest tiles, so there's lots of opportunities to see how Yunaka's covert unit type bonus makes her extremely evasive. This alone gives a great first impression of Yunaka to the player, and I think it's part of why she's seen as so powerful by a lot of the fanbase. Having Yunaka separated off with a Leer also means you're going to have to take advantage of the staff utility she gets from having Micaiah equipped, so you get to learn how effective Micaiah can be. Plus, Great Sacrifice allows her to influence the other half of the map as well, which will reveal one of Micaiah's other benefits, access to tons of practically free experience. I think this is a much more effective introduction for a unit like Yunaka compared to if they just had her join with the bulk of your army in a more typical map. In this map, you are basically forced to use her, and it's set up to help her succeed. You get to see how strong daggers are, how much evasion covert units can have, and how great it is to be able to add staff utility to any unit. Importantly, these concepts are worth learning whether you use Yunaka long-term or not. These concepts will still be relevant when you need to evaluate Zelkov, the game's second thief, as well as Marin, the next dagger unit you get after that, as well as any covert unit such as Alchrist in his special class. After Chapter 6, the game starts to open up, and it becomes more about challenging the player to apply what they've learned. There are still lots of things to learn about, like dancing and how to use other emblem rings, but there are fewer maps that are designed primarily to teach you things. Fortunately, the first 6 chapters prepare new players very well. They're engaging on the first playthrough, and they manage to teach you a lot without overwhelming you with tons of boring tutorial text. There's still a little bit of that, but a lot of concepts are taught through play, which is a lot more fun both on the initial playthrough and when replaying the game. If you want to see some of these maps in action, I started streaming a Maddening run this week. You can check out the stream schedule on screen if you want to join us. Additionally, if you can think of a map that does a great job of teaching the player how to play Fire Emblem, I'd love to hear about it in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, consider hitting the like or subscribe button so that you never miss an upload, and have yourself a great week.